East of Eden is one of Steinbeck's most important books. It was about his family. It's about the Cain and Abel story, fathers and sons, and how they dealt with the heritage of good and evil. Steinbeck was writing out part of his own story and his own anxieties about being his father and the own anxieties about what would happen to his sons. Steinbeck's relationship with his father, I think, was also complex. All the years, his teenage years, from about 11 to 18, when he went away to college, I think he felt ashamed of his father. His father was struggling financially, and I think that pain became much of his own, and his sense of his childhood as feeling like an outsider.
Also, it's a cautionary tale, at least the book was. That's why it's dedicated to my brother and myself. My father loved cautionary tales. He thought you could save a lot of problems for humans if you could basically lay out someone in a similar situation. That's what storytelling was for. I once knew a guy, and he's actually talking about you, and you can sort of come to decisions based upon what happens to people in these kind of stories. That's how I think my father thought that literature was functional. My father would have this way of taking this gigantic human myth like Cain and Abel and putting it next door to you downtown. I mean, it's like the neighbors next door. It's going on with the neighbors.
Steinbeck said, at some point, I want to write a story of my valley. I need to write a story of my home place, the Salinas Valley. Salinas is a kind of metaphor, I think, for life itself and for what he was doing in the book.
Salinas is a character, as is Monterey, where Kathy basically finds her new refuge. It takes a long time to get from Salinas to Monterey in those days. It was a train. It was a big deal. Culturally, it's just as different as it is today. Monterey is the artistic end, and, Salinas is the agricultural end, and one's Democrat and one's Republican, and, just on and on and on. I don't think my father ever had a great deal of nostalgia for the Salinas of everyone else. There was his Salinas, but it's not a very attractive Salinas. It's a small town with small town views.
He felt like there were all these, what he later called Salinas fat cats, and he saw himself as separate from that. So he was a kind of moody, dark young man, and that's captured in Cal.
He saw the failings of his characters mimicked in the failings of the environment they grew up in. I think basically pretty much the same thing.
Go on home, German!
I shot him because he tried to stop me. I could have killed him if I'd wanted to, but I didn't. I just wanted him to let me go.
After Steinbeck's divorce from his second wife, Gwen, in 1948, he was absolutely devastated because he had loved her with the same love that Adam feels for Kathy. And indeed, there's much of Gwen in the Kathy-Kate character. And I think that Adam's love for her, his disappointment with what happens to her, his inability to really come to terms with his sons and know quite what to do with his sons, there's a lot of that, of Steinbeck in there.
My mother. What was she like? Was she bad?
I never really knew what she was like. She wasn't like other people. There was something she seemed to lack. Kindness, maybe? Conscience.
When she's introduced in the book as a monster, she kills her parents by burning down the family home. She seduces a teacher and ruins him. She has some boys in her class run out of town for sort of accusation that they were about to rape her, so it's a town scandal. And then, in the book, he kept rewriting her as he was writing the book. So by the end of the book, she becomes not sympathetic, but at least comprehensible, perhaps understandable, and in her attempt to deal with her sons, maybe there's even some humanity there.
My father didn't believe in absolute evil or absolute good, period. He believed that our awareness of these things created the identities we set up for them. Steinbeck's really aware that without that, or at least our personal concepts of good and evil, it makes for a lousy reading.
One of the things he wanted readers to do was to see that we have evil in ourselves. We're capable of things we don't even want to admit we're capable of. So you should feel that there's something about Kathy that is also in you.
You think I'm bad?
I don't know.
Whereas the original book has several major fulcrums. Kazan could only allow himself one, and Adbra is it. She's the center. I mean, she's the one that gives our audience the idea that there's a better way.
You're not so grown up.
I'm very grown up.
That's a matter of opinion.
I'm very grown up. More so than Dad because I forgave him for not understanding. And the minute I forgave him in my mind, I felt better.
You don't see this much in a film, but her family is tainted. Her father has been, reprehensible in some ways. And so she has to confront the nature of evil. And that makes her obviously a better partner for Cal, but also more compassionate, more understanding.
It's awful not to be loved. It's the worst thing in the world.
Compassion is very important in the book. Compassion can really help somebody like Cal change. He's sort of on the edge, and Abra pulls him over to the other side.
Every generation has to relearn these lessons again and again about forgiveness and about compassion and about looking for love that's not there. Why isn't it there? Why am I the only one left out?
This is my son, Cal.
Ray Massey, besides representing that generalization, the stern, traditional Christian culture, if you will, he also represented something to Elia Kazan. I mean, that is to say, his own father. Now, his own father was quite a different figure in the sense that he was a Greek immigrant, but he was stern, he was unforgiving, he was not very understanding of his son's needs and so forth. He and Kazan had a huge struggle over just Kazan going to college because the old man wanted to come in the rug business with him. And I suppose you could say that the conflict that he and the James Dean character, Cal, get into is a version of the conflict that Kazan had acted out with his own father.
Kazan pared down the book. He said he himself was interested in the last 80 pages. Having said that, I think Kazan does capture the essence of the book, because I think part 4 is the essence of the book. I think Kazan saw in that tension between father and son some of his own life, and I think he wanted to work with that material. For his part, Steinbeck really thought that if Kazan was making the film, it was Kazan's movie, not his.
He didn't want at any time be an intimidating factor in this, and this always pretty much happens for a well-known author. I mean, even his presence on the set implies criticism, and in many cases, that's a very unsuccessful type of relationship. My father would much rather wait for you down at the bar. He would bend over backwards to help if he thought that director was going in the right direction, and obviously all of his life he thought that Kazan was going in the right direction. They seemed to share a lot of very, very sympathetic visions of things. They found it very easy to work together.
They were lifelong friends, and among the first people to read The Galley of East of Eden was Kazan. Kazan took it to Jack Warner at Warner Brothers, and he says in his autobiography, it's the easiest sale I ever made. I went in, Jack Warner said, "What do you want to do?" He said, "I want to do this East of Eden." And Warner just says, "You got it." So let's go to lunch.
Paul Osborne, who wrote the screenplay, said to me, "You ought to go to the theater and look at that fellow playing some sort of an Arab." And I saw him. I mean, I didn't think much of him. I called him into the Warner Brother office, and he came there, and he just sat there looking rather surly and unresponsive.
The kid was awful. I mean, he sort of looked like an unmade bed, and he was inarticulate.
Then he finally said to me, "Do you want a ride on my bike?" So I said, "Yeah, I'll take a ride on your bike." So I got in the back of his bike, and he went around the city in the goddamn bike, and I wish I'd never met him. But as I got to talking to him more and more and more, I said, "This guy's it." And I called Steinbeck up. I said, "I'll tell you, I found a guy that may not be a great actor, but he is it." I said, "Is that important?" He says, "If he's it, send him up." So I sent him up to John, and John said, "I don't like the guy, but he's it." He said, "He's the guy."
When Steinbeck said he's perfect for the part, I think part of his body movements is kind of, the kind of awkwardness, his slouching, his, dark looks, his very inarticulateness. I think that really conveys that brooding quality.
He was cast in The Immortalist. They did all their rehearsals. They were trying out in Philadelphia. And what nobody knew was that Kazan had his eye on Jimmy and wanted to get him out of The Immortalist, but it was opening. And they did a screen test. And Kazan decided that he would commit to Jimmy. On opening night in New York, Jimmy gave his notice, which means he had 2 weeks in the play and then was free to do East of Eden.
Action. Do you think it's pretty?
Yes. It's very pretty, Cal.
I had been one of the first actors that were taken into the actor's studio in New York City, and I met Mr. Kazan there. So we worked together on a play that the actor's studio actually did. I was about 28, I guess, and Jimmy was 4 or 5 years younger. And they wanted to see if I looked too old for him.
You know what? I doubt if Dad even knows that today's his birthday.
He probably doesn't. But I guess I didn't, because I got the part and we did the movie.
I had another great performance in that thing from Jo Van Fleet. People have forgotten about Jo Van Fleet, and she's neglected now, but she was a great actress.
And then you throw Raymond Massey in this mix, who looked down his nose at virtually everybody. Anybody he hadn't done rep with was not worth doing it.
Ray Massey's performance is very stiff, very unyielding, very moralistic, very stern. But that was Ray. I mean, he was in life. I mean, I knew him. He was a stiff. And he had, off-screen in particular, just a terrible relationship with Jimmy Dean. He would be upsetting to Ray's sense of decorum.
He was always cutting in on his lines, saying the wrong lines.
And Ray would go to Aaliyah, and he'd say, Gadge, that's what we called him, Gadge. And he'd say, you know what, you've got to stop this young man.
Massey had learned the script exactly. And he would say to me, he's not saying the lines. I say, all right, I'll get him to say the lines. And then I'd let Jimmy, I was tricky. I'd let Jimmy do it the way he wanted because it irritated him. Then I'd photograph it.
He was always inventing. He was never the same. You didn't know what was coming. So you had to listen, you had to watch, you had to really be there. And I can't think of acting as saying, well, you didn't say that before, why don't you do it the same way? No, I think that's not acting, that's imitating or something. It's not being, because nobody ever does the same thing twice. I mean, in acting, we have to say the same words twice, but we don't have to say them the same way. We don't have to say them in the same rhythm.
He really compresses the amount of frustration and loss and anger and that kind of thing you feel when you're 16, 17 years old. Everybody's betrayed me. And then doing this Richard III thing. Well, if they're going to call me a villain, I'm going to be a big villain, overreacting and everything. In this constant squirming search to be accepted by the one person that you love most in the world.
Gradually, I got a terrific respect for Jimmy because of his talent. He is a tremendously talented guy and would do anything to be good. He was way open.
Jimmy invited me on a number of occasions to have dinner at his father and stepmother's place. And it was an excruciatingly uncomfortable experience because they were totally inarticulate and never communicated with one another, really. And he tried so hard to reach his father, to make some contact with a man who wasn't able. He wasn't able, and it was sad. And how easy it was to pick that up and use it. And Jimmy used it, of course, in East of Eden, because that was the backbone of the story. And Raymond Massey didn't understand James Dean for one moment, or anything about him, or want to understand anything about him. I think Kazan knew this.
Do you think I would do anything to stop that antagonism? No, I increased it because it was the central thing that I photographed. But what I photographed was their relationship to each other, the absolute hatred that Ray Massey felt for Jimmy Dean and the hatred Jimmy Dean felt for Ray Massey. That's precious, man. You can't get that. No director can get that. You hopefully arouse it. Do you get me? You're essentially awakening something that's there by some tactic or other, some means or other, by some hint or other, by some stimulus or other.
He said, directors are desperate people. He said, we will get what we need by hook or by crook somehow.
They were shooting that scene where Jimmy Dean comes in and sees his mother, who's, first time he had seen her, she's a prostitute. And Kazan took Jimmy Dean around and got him in a headlock. And he get ready to, okay, roll him, get ready. He shoved Jimmy Dean coming into the office because he wanted to get that reaction when he saw his mother. And Jimmy Dean didn't forgive him for that. He didn't think I could act that. He had to wrestle me around.
Mr. Kazan was very, very easy to work with and very stimulating. He absolutely adored actors because, of course, he had been an actor himself, and he was so exciting to be with, and he got everybody excited about what they were doing.
Kazan told me, see that fort over there? It was Monday morning. We're going to shoot Friday. I want you here Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I want you to learn everything about that fort. Drive it over around the lot, work out how to crank it. I knew everything about that Model T.
And you give her a hard spin. She caught. First time. Oh, caught her what?
That's what he wanted. He wanted the actor to be as if he's contributed to the scene as much as the director. He didn't direct that way, just do this, let's do that. He wanted to find out what made the actor tick.
I always remember the last day of shooting, and I didn't know, I guess at that time, whether I was going to go to the cast party, so I was looking for him to say goodbye. And I went up to his trailer, and I knocked on the door and said, "Jimmy," I didn't hear anything. I knocked again, and then I heard sort of muffled cries, and then I knocked harder, and he came to the door. The tears were streaming down his face, and he said, "It's the last day, it's over." And it was so moving that he was so affected that this was his first movie, and it was so important to him, and now it was gone. Like, we are such things, such stuff as dreams are made on. It's true, the actor takes on this persona, and now it's not there anymore, it's gone.
From the heart of Broadway, the entertainment capital of the world, where hundreds of spectators are excitedly awaiting the arrival of the stars.
Kazan was something special. And if you were growing up and taking an interest in the theatrical arts in the 50s in this country, you had to come to Kazan. I mean, he was just an important guy in terms of forming sensibilities in that era.
Steinbeck wrote that the only purpose in his writing was to help people understand one another, and that writing should reach out to help people comprehend what's going on with other people. And I think he was always a very compassionate writer himself. I think that's one of the reasons he's so popular.
Long after their association in film, they enjoyed each other's company and talked about writing and were involved with each other for a long period of time. They were always planning stuff. They were like kids. I think it was larger than just association of a writer and, quote-unquote, he was a director for a couple of films. They had one thing in common. My father's favorite line, I remember I had asked him many years ago, he said, "What is the purpose of being a writer?" And my father said, "To reconnect humans to their own humanity. Their memory of compassion, their memory of pain, their memory of things they forget." And I always thought that was a brilliant description of what these guys were doing.